Welcome, everybody. My name is Gina Waldhorn. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Sports Innovation Lab. And this AMA series was designed to create a new channel of access to leaders and to trailblazers during a time when really more than ever taking risks and taking action became critical to the survival of the sports industry. So if you're new to the series, last week we welcomed the head of content for Yahoo Sports. Previously, we've been joined from leaders from anyone from the Boston Celtics to the LA Rams, to Val Ackerman, chairman of the Big East Conference, to Bernadette Peters, chairman of the A10 conference, to NBA champion Paul Gasol, and executive leadership from companies like Clear and Armored Things, Cisco, Intel, and ultimately our goal is to garner perspectives from across and even a bit outside the sports industry, covering operators, players, teams, leagues, and technology companies to really inform and inspire action during this time. And we love to explore new spaces, and that brings us today. We have our first guest, and couldn't get a better one, from the esports industry. But before I go ahead and introduce our guest today, let me go ahead and tell you guys how this works if you want to get involved. So first of all, let me get back and share my screen with you guys so I can show you. Since this is an AMA, we want to make sure that if you'd so like, you can ask some questions. So first of all, you guys are on mute right now. Please stay there. We'll let you know how you can ask questions, but not through your voice. If you like what you hear today and want to continue the conversation with anyone at the Sports Innovation Lab, with other members of the esports community, with just other leaders in the community, please join our Slack channel. It is open to everyone and is close to 1,000 members from all different facets of the industry. Really a place to discuss, innovate, find resources. The links there, we'll also go ahead and post it in the chat window. And we just finished at the end of last week our first ever hackathon. It was an amazing success. If you'd like to see the ideas that were selected as the finalists coming out of that hackathon, you can join us for a live announcement this Friday at 3 p.m. We'll go ahead and shoot the link in there to register. We'll tell you a little bit about who those finalists are and what the ideas are that they came up with to recreate the power of fan togetherness. And on this Thursday, we are welcoming Craig Duncan, Chief Revenue Officer from VenueTize. If you're not familiar with VenueTize, they're a technology platform powering some of the biggest venues and sports organizations in the world. They work with the Memphis Grizzlies, they work with Miami Dolphins, TD Garden, Little Caesars Arena. So if you're curious about how technology is helping to protect and bring sports and fans back into a live environment, check out that AMA on Thursday. But today we are here to talk about esports, and we want you to talk and ask some questions. So please remain on mute, and if you have a question, go ahead and enter it into the chat window. If you need to jump out or you like what you hear today and want to watch it again or share it with your network, we will be following up with a recording of today's session. So if you're not familiar with how to use the Zoom chat functionality, go ahead and click on the little chat icon at the bottom or top of your window, your Zoom window. That's going to expand a screen, and then you can choose to either post your question to the full group by posting to everyone, or you can select to send it privately to the host, which would be Abe or myself, and we'll be curating the questions and asking them on behalf of you guys. So no holds barred, go ahead, ask anything that is on your mind. So with that, I would like to go ahead and introduce both our host and our guest today. So moderating today's discussion is Abe Stein, a senior strategist at the Sports Innovation Lab, where he helps clients to navigate the rapidly evolving media ecosystem. Abe holds a Master's of Science from MIT in Comparative Media Studies, where he researched interactive sports media. So perfect for today. He's co-editor of the book Sports Video Games, the first academic volume on the subject, and his writing can be found in The Atlantic, Convergence, the International Journal of Research into New Media Landscapes, Loading, and Eludamus. He began his career in media as a sound designer for film, TV, and games, and his sound work is featured in documentary films and video games, and in the surprisingly short-lived Adult Swim animated series, Assy McGee. Why Abe's bio doesn't lead with as featured in Assy McGee, I don't know, probably to go with how humble he actually is.
I don't know how you kept a straight face saying Assy McGee, Gina.
Thank you for hosting with us, and we'll all have to go check out some of those clips on YouTube after today. And Joining Abe, and we are thrilled to have with us Craig Levine, Global Chief Strategy Officer at ESL, the world's largest independent esports company. In this role, Levine focuses on global strategic partnerships and strengthening ESL's digital platforms and technology to engage fans and players worldwide. Previously, Levine served as CEO of ESL North America, where he led the North American strategy and operations for ESL. Levine has actually helped pioneer the entire esports industry for over 15 years. As a longtime gamer, Levine founded Team 3D, the first truly professional and successful video game team in North America, in April 2002. In addition, he also co-founded agency ESS, an event marketing and technology company specializing in video game entertainment. ESS agency was acquired by Turtle Entertainment in 2014 to expand ESL's global footprint to North America. Craig holds a BS in Information Systems and Management and Organizational Behavior from the Stern Business School at NYU. Craig, thank you so much for joining us today. And with that, Abe, I'll hand it over to you to kick off the discussion.
Awesome. Thank you, Gina. Thank you. I feel like I need to begin with like a full disclosure, which is I can remember the day that I first met Craig Levine. It was like a cold February day at a diner in New York City. And I remember we sat there for a very long time talking about, you were just starting to build out the Northeast ESL, office. And Craig gave me a job at ESL. So I got a chance to rap with my former boss here, which is awesome. So Craig, I'm super excited. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Awesome. I want to pick up where Gina kind of left off with the bio, which is something that I think is really important that people don't often understand about you, which is that your background in esports goes way back, about as far back as, to be honest, a lot of people could even go in this burgeoning industry. I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about what it was like getting started when you were at NYU trying to form a team and really kick things off.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it gets fuzzier as time goes on, but a little bio helps. No, always kind of grew up playing video games with friends and family. Nintendo's early renditions of PC gaming and the internet. And when I was a freshman at NYU, had kind of always competed at a high level in a game called Counter-Strike, which ironically is still here 20 years later. But became very obvious you weren't going to go to school, have a life, get good grades, play the amount of hours you need to play to compete at that level. So kind of switched to start a professional team. And at that point, we were literally paid in like Subway restaurant, gift coupons through our barter deals, and eventually got up to modest salaries and traveled to compete around the world, and kind of grew and grew. So esports is something that has existed for 20 something years. Obviously the last 6 years or so it's really exploded, but we've sort of been there by the side as a player, as a team owner, now on the business side with ESL, through each step along that journey.
Yeah, and I feel like, just to kind of, I know that in your experience, you sort of, even at that very beginning, always had a kind of a vision for the professionalization of esports and the kind of turning it into an industry. I remember reading stories about how even early on with your teams, you were coaching players on how to talk to camera, right? How to do interviews, understanding that even as it wasn't a big scene yet, you had a sense that like these guys, this whole industry is going to need to grow and learn how to kind of be a professional industry. Has that been a thing that you've carried kind of the whole way through?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to say that we all saw it coming, but to be honest with you, it was a little bit more simplistic. Just something that we all really enjoyed. But sort of to your point, right, we saw that here we were, the leading edge, a lot of different technology and early adopters of the internet and video games and, computers even at that point, and social networking, and just kind of saw like, hey, if we're into this, there's this, sort of time lapse element where you go, at some point, this is going to keep growing and growing and growing. And the way that we needed to do it, just to make a career out of it in a very selfish way for ourselves, was to try to professionalize it through each step along the way, right? By not just being the best team in the world, but being having a brand around ourselves and being mindful of that in terms of how we carried ourselves, not just when you lose, when you win, but when you lose, and then using that as the foundation to ultimately to build a business around.
So looking back now, I mean, really almost 20 years between when you were first kicking things off and like where we are in 2020. Obviously, esports has grown in attention. There's been new money that's been poured into it from a lot of different directions, and especially from the traditional sports space. That's where Sports Innovation Lab pays a lot of attention, that kind of overlap between traditional sports. But I'm wondering, in your perspective, from a person who's lived through that timeline, what do you feel is most different in 2020 than what you were dealing with, 20 years ago or so?
Yeah, it's probably easier to answer it the opposite and then say what's similar. And
Yeah.
I think the similarities really are still what drives it forward, right? It's the fact that it's an attractive demographic, it's elusive through other mediums, it's about community, right? It's not just the competition, but it's the access to this audience, and that I believe the personal way that it allows different partners to step into people's lives, is more interactive than that of traditional sports and many entertainment. So I think those are some of the similarities in terms of what's changed is, the fact that, when we started, it was all early days of internet, pre-social media. So, some big turning points, I would say, along that 20-year journey had been, one, the shift of games into games as a service. So moving away from this box sale of, Madden 2004 to 2005, and now they're selling such a big part of game publisher business is games as a service. So the ongoing monetization that's coming out of the retention and engagement of the audience within the video games. So now esports aligns with the goals of the video game publisher because it facilitates those things. Competitive players, publishers have found are 3 to 5 times more engaged, and engagement really is ARPU. So I think that was one of the big shifts along the journey. The second is the democratization of content, right? The creation of platforms like YouTube, Facebook, even Twitch.tv, certainly, where we didn't need a big distribution deal in the early days of video gaming and esports. We'd have to host our own videos and we'd auction them off. And, if you had too many people watching, it would cost you too much money, and there wasn't really a business behind it. So really kind of clumsy. But this really allowed us to self-publish, if you will, and for this passion to then find its way to people all over the world. And that's still one of the things that's so unique about it, is the global digital nature of it all. And then the business that comes with it, right? As you start having an audience at scale, an audience that's attractive, then, layering in, figuring out through, drawing inspiration of best practices at other sports and creating an individual touch on how we approach it ourselves with this digital first entertainment medium, is then building that business, which today for esports is largely across sponsorship, media rights, advertising, merchandise, ticketing, some publisher work kind of fitted in there to round it all out.
Yeah, it resonates with this notion that we talk about at the Sports Innovation Lab a lot, which is that esports will continue to grow. It'll continue to be an audience that media and different businesses are going to want to attract. But actually, that a lot of what traditional sports can learn from esports has less to do with the video games themselves, but everything about the business and how it's packaged and produced, and what you were talking about in terms of the democratization of content and the ability to produce content, in an agile way, games as a service, in the different ways that it's monetized is some of the pieces. Do you get the sense that because you've had conversations with traditional sports teams and leagues and things, are they reluctant? Are they, hesitant? What's the tension here between the excitement about the audience, but the reluctance to kind of learn from what esports has done?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. Most sports are aging up. And I think that's a scary thing when you think about that. And for anyone on today who has young kids, my guess is they're probably spending more time on their iPad connecting, playing games like Fortnite or Minecraft, depending on their age, and connecting with friends through those games versus, in some cases, picking up the phone and calling them like we used to when we were kids. So I think those are generational changes that start to become, one, undeniable, and actually a little bit scary as you project it out. And then, as though that generation then becomes parents, and the pastime of video games gets shared generationally in the same way that I grew up throwing a baseball in the backyard with my dad, that's where, if you extrapolate this out, it becomes, really kind of scary, I think, for a lot of those sports, or disruptive is maybe a better word, right? That there will be Team Liquid fans in the future because their dad or mother was a fan of Team Liquid, the same way that I'm a Mets fan because of that. So I always say this is still super early, but when you kind of peel away at the onion a little bit of what's really at the center, it's changing tastes and changing consumer habits. And I think for us, not having to build a business, you're a lot more flexible in how you approach that. In traditional sports, it has built up these incredible media empires over decades or centuries in some cases. There's big business that you sometimes have to disrupt, and it's almost like the innovator's dilemma a little bit, right? How much can you innovate while disrupting your business and protecting yourself for the future? And when you look at sports like Major League Baseball and their early social media policies about, clip sharing, or sports gambling and the approach that sports had, I mean, it evolves then, but the early take and stance I think many sports have towards bleeding edge technologies can then influence the ability of that audience to really wrap their arms around it. And again, we didn't have a business to latch onto or protect. I wish we did, don't get me wrong. And we do now, but we were kind of afforded the luxury of being able to be a lot more experimental through these stages and through the growth of the internet and technology.
And there's been a renewed excitement around esports, I feel, in the past 2 months because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the common refrain is that look at this industry that's figured out remote competition, right? Like they've got this all figured out, as though COVID-19 didn't affect esports. And we were even talking about this before we kind of kicked off the conversation about how and especially for ESL too, esports is not just remote. It depends tremendously on really full scale live sporting events. I'm curious what in running ESL have you seen in terms of how you've had to react and respond, and what do you think is the global kind of reaction in the esports industry to the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at, early on, we were mimicking and still do mimic that of a lot of traditional sports, and that's part of the growth to gain legitimacy, let's say, as you replicate emulate what you're trying to become, right? So everything from our logo to the idea of going to these sports arenas and bringing fans and what the productions look like and the commentators was something that all along that journey that we really closely mimicked. And then certainly with the impact then of COVID. So we grew our business of esports and ESL into these, arenas with 10,000 people screaming, these tens of millions of people watching live over the internet. And it felt very analogous. And then certainly with the way that COVID-19 has impacted all sports entertainment, we've had the luxury of being digital. So that's allowed us to be nimble and agile and adapt back and say, okay, we're going to go from this world of big live global arena competitions to regionally based online competitions with players competing either from home or their place of work, depending on where in the world they might be in the current situation, and then to do remote productions around it. And it's been interesting to see that because we had a 20-year heritage and library really of footage that you get Power of TV is pretty strong, so we're able to recreate a lot of those feels just based off having this archive of footage. Also being able to lean into it pretty quickly of this idea of remoteness and digital workspace. We didn't miss a broadcast day, again, because our competitions can still happen from all over. There's latency concerns, but it's not like you need, 22 people lined up against one another on a pitch or on a field in order for it to happen. So we've had to adapt just like everyone else, but fortunate that we've been able to keep our lights on and that our audience has followed. So we've seen record-breaking KPIs in terms of participation in our platform. I always say the best thing about video games are playing them. So we host all different competitions for that. And then secondly, the viewership of our highest level of competitions continues to be record-setting, as there's a void, quite frankly, in other sports and entertainment, and a pause in many aspects of people's lives.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think, I saw a LinkedIn post even today from one of, I think, ESL's broadcast engineers about how you were able to put together basically a rig in his house so that he could broadcast out of his home office. And again, in terms of learnings that the traditional sports industry could take away from the esports industry, it's incredible to me how nimble of a production system you have developed over the years. And I mean, I've seen the shows we used to do at arenas where we pulled whole entire trucks, just like a traditional sports broadcast, but then to see a post where he's like, I'm producing an event, from my bedroom basically, or my office. It's taking you, I suspect, a while to kind of get that flow together. What was the story like in terms of getting ESL to a point where you could be that nimble?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of grew from that, which is the irony, right? We've gone back to the
Mm.
future, and if you will, of looking at these things of how we grew with low cost, agile solutions, right, in virtual field of play. And here we are drawing from that again. And, I think we had continuous, as an industry, been pushing ourselves from a quality standard, right? Always measuring ourselves again against sports entertainment. And it's been really interesting now through this whole pandemic situation to see all of sports entertainment, things like this happening from our homes, or newscasts happening, in some cases, maybe the bathroom with their husband behind them, or these funny Zoom stories everyone's hearing. But it kind of just speaks to the core of content of what people want. And I think that'll be one of the interesting things to see what becomes more lasting is quality expectation that's out there, the ROI that you get with all the glitz and glamour. I think inertia and the competitive inertia has carried people forward in so many of the ways that we approach production value, to see that perhaps there's a renewed emphasis on perhaps a more casual tone, the storytelling around it, the engagement beyond the live broadcast, that really stimulates and grows that community. What everyone takes when we all go back to normal is something we're thinking a lot about.
Terrific. I mean, the other area of excitement I've noticed around the esports phenomenon in this pandemic kind of period of time has been around the traditional sports video games that have been competed in an esports kind of way. So whether it's the NASCAR races that are being done in iRacing, Formula One races, I'm very high on the digital motorsport stuff, or maybe it's the NBA 2K League having NBA players play, right? Or Major League Baseball. And you and I over the years have had a number of back and forth about traditional, because we're both big traditional sports fans too, about whether or not they're a viable video game esport kind of parallel path. And I'm curious if you see that to be another area of potential considerable growth in esports, or whether it's parallel, whether it's more aligned. I mean, they don't have numbers like Counter-Strike or Dota or League of Legends or things like that. But is it something that you think now is going to grow or kind of continue to develop?
I think some of it will. I think for the most part, watching someone play this, NBA 2K or FIFA is not as good as watching someone play the real thing. Maybe I'm a sports purist like that. I mean, ultimately, why people watch sports is less about the sport, and it's the investment into the characters, the human interest story of, Steph Curry versus LeBron, or, Brady versus whomever. And I think people forget that a little bit. So there's this rush idea that we could just take what we do and go digital, right, and everyone's going to care. People care because of the emotional investment into the teams, into the players. So that takes time really to create, to sustain, and then to grow. And I don't know that a lot of the initiatives you spoke to are really sustainable. I think they're a little gimmicky. When I look back of what, the NBA did with their NBA 2K tournament, I think it was smart that they used NBA stars and they were able to get players like Kevin Durant into that. Right. Ultimately, I didn't find it all that compelling, a little bit flat. So I think there's ways to iterate on that. But when you look at, race simulating as an example, and you say the skill set of being a top sim racer to the skill set of being a top driver are actually very similar. And you've even heard stories now who have racers who have started online and qualified in, and then won in sort of the physical race as well. I think that becomes a huge opportunity for sports like that, because it's a way to just completely rethink the way you grow and engage your fan base. But for the most part, I think the fandom around esports that exists is different than that of the sports games, again, where you could lean into the idea of fantasy of it, where you could have the ultimate teams in FIFA or in Madden from EA's case, and you could start to pair up these lineups that couldn't exist. To me, becomes much more compelling than some of the other ones. So people are experimenting. I give them credit for that. I do suspect that the business they've generated is a little bit more immaterial. So I think the opportunity for them is really how to use video games and competitive gaming as a way to grow and to engage your fan base and grow interest, more than it really becoming the fourth league of the NBA, as Adam Silver likes to refer to NBA 2K League.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic point. I mean, when some of the younger racers in F1, for example, were already on Twitch and racing sim races before any of this even happened, right? So all that's happened is they've now grown their following to a thing that they were doing already. And so I think that's a fantastic point, and that it was sort of natural there, and that the skills translate because you're literally turning a wheel and stepping on pedals. So, and they were spending a lot of time in simulators just practicing for real F1 races as it is anyway.
Totally.
This one is a kind of more of a specific hardware question about kind of the growth of esports being largely a PC and console based space, and very specifically, almost mostly a PC based enterprise. Is that a hurdle? Is that a problem in that PC penetration, compared to the smartphone, is significantly lower? Is it limit kind of the growth potential for esports audiences? And if no, why not? And if yes, then where is the growth going to come from, do you imagine?
I think it's all part of the trajectory and evolution of it and maturation. I think it's just esports has historically started on PC gaming because it's an open platform for innovation. That's where a lot of new games could come through, that, Microsoft versus these closed ecosystems of Microsoft and Sony with Xbox and PlayStation respectively. So I think that's why you've seen so much of it. Also, then the interactivity was, again, easier to bloom and blossom out of that, right? So things like Twitch, you'd have your screen up watching your Twitch broadcast, typing and chatting, and your other window would have you playing the game. So I think that seamlessness, if you will, is why it grew from there. And then again, when you look at, I call them the big three of esports, it's Counter-Strike, been around for 20 years, League of Legends for over 10, Dota for over 10. There's staying power there. And I think that the business of the consoles in particular took time until recently it adapted to that games as a service. So there wasn't a whole lot of, say, ongoing incentive for maintenance of these communities. So I think that's why you've seen it start with PC and continue to grow. Certainly, consoles have its place with particular niches of it. When you look at a game like FIFA, it's a massive game, played very heavily on PlayStation. So it's not going away, but I think it isn't as broad. Let's say also the skill ceiling of a keyboard and mouse tends to create more complexity and richness to the experience, that when you compete with anything at the highest level, that's what you want to see is the mastery. I think the platform to keep an eye on that we all are is mobile. It's the one that we're most bullish on, right? The idea of PC or console or mobile is all blurred together, right? It's only a matter of time till it's all one. So to me, mobile is when, not if, and you're already seeing today big mobile games like PUBG, Tencent's PUBG Mobile, Clash of Clans, Clash Royale. You're seeing much richer games come out now on mobile devices. That's increasing the stickiness, more robustness around community and interactivity. So you're seeing more staying power to those titles. So I think that's really the platform that we're keeping an eye on. I don't know that it'll ever, quote unquote, substitute PC gaming, but at some point this all blends together as well.
Yeah, well, and globally, smartphone penetration is growing faster than almost anything else, right? And so if mobile unlocks in a way like you're describing, that unlocks geographic regions and a whole scale of audience that maybe we didn't even consider before. So.
And we're already seeing it, right? I mean, in countries like China, in Indonesia, in Brazil, in India, there are arenas of people watching people play mobile first esports. So it's happening for exactly the reasons you said. There's this, accessibility to technology, the socioeconomic changes in those territories just make mobile a much more accessible platform.
All right, I'm gonna turn to some of the questions that are coming in on chat now, because we got some good ones coming in. Here's one from John asking, what do you see as the biggest growth opportunity today for esports with all the success that we're seeing in things like 2K League or Counter-Strike and Fortnite, I suppose, to some extent?
Yeah, I think the biggest opportunity for esports, I believe, is really unlocking a direct-to-consumer product. The video game industry is $145 billion. That's bigger than music and movies combined, I think, for the last 8 years or something like that. Fact check me. But the esports industry is, quote unquote, only $1 billion or $1.5 billion. Now it's quickly growing within there, but I think that shows the opportunity that exists around really creating value for these consumers around the fandom and passion that they have. So I don't think anyone's really cracked that code just yet. But that I think is still one of the biggest opportunities for esports, is to truly unlock some of that digital revenue, if you will, that we've seen some of the game publishers start to do through things like esports specific digital items, these big battle pass compendium kind of crowdsourced prize pools and things like that. I think that's a trend that will continue.
Here's a bit of a technical question that I'm going to expand on a little bit, which is about how are you dealing with lag? And then I would kind of add to that too, is this an increasingly complicated problem as games as a service evolves, right? And so like the opportunity even for using dedicated LANs, which of course you can't do in a remote situation anyway, but when everything has to pass through the game as a service that the publisher has set up as well, then you're dependent. I mean, FIFA is notorious for this, right? Their servers are notoriously bad. So I guess, yeah, how do you deal with lag, and is it a growing problem or a problem that's being solved? Or
notoriously bad means notoriously busy, so
right.
depends which way you look at it.
It's a good point.
No, I mean, so lag or latency essentially is this idea that when, let's say 10 people are playing together, they're connecting through a central server, and the actions of every individual on their own device has to go through the internet and ultimately, right, be synced and recreated to each of the other 9 participants. So for us, or with video games, it therefore is very challenging to create, call it intercontinental gameplay, Europe to North America, for example, or Europe to Asia, or Asia to the US, because of delays over latency, which essentially then increases the lag, which increases the time it takes from when I say go left for that movement to register in everyone else. So having low latency or little lag is extremely important with high levels of competition, because you want fair play. Right? It would be like if, I don't know, all of a sudden in, I don't know, basketball, half the players were wearing, body weights and everyone else didn't, you can imagine how that could impact it. So for us, the first way that we've dealt with that through the, COVID-19 situation is regionalizing play. So essentially saying everyone's back at their homes for health and safety reasons, and now we're going to create continental leagues to the competition. So all of our North American teams are competing in this division. All of our European players are over here versus, pre-COVID, at the Barclays Center, we'd be bringing together the best teams from all over the world. So that was one way to do it. The second way that we handle it is by having robust server infrastructure with data centers all over the world to make sure that we can always optimize for a fair playing field. And there's really interesting innovation out there, again, just, technology and the internet now, through even companies like SpaceX that are looking at this and saying, what can we do to create less cross-region latency? So I think there's going to be more of it. I think that's going to, again, create more opportunity for video games and esports, and we'll see how that evolves. So it's something we think a lot about, and is a real limitation to our world.
Is cloud gaming an overhyped potential solution to this, or is this something that you think is going to be real? And if so, how soon? I mean, they were pitching it, so I guess you could buy Google Stadia now, right? To mix effects. So
yeah, I've got one hooked up. I mean, look, all technology takes longer, right? From when the smartphone came out, everyone was going to have it, or even the internet. So it's a matter of, again, when, not if. But from a competitive perspective, I think it first has to prove it out of the consumer side. Things like 5G are going to accelerate that adoption and the quality. But ultimately, for it to be a meaningful part of competitive video gaming or esports at the highest level, I think it's still some time away just from an infrastructure. But you're seeing those early signs be proved out.
Gotcha. Another question coming in. Esports events can be notoriously long, right? But what does ESL do? What are some of the things that ESL does to expand the engagement window from beyond just when the competition takes place to before, or even during breaks or during after? What are some of the content hooks or things that you all do to expand that window of engagement?
Yeah, it's something we've been thinking a lot about in this COVID time. I mean, esports events are historically long, I think, because you have to look at what is the experience we're recreating. And I would argue we're more recreating, call it a US Open of tennis, than an NFL game that you go to, right? That's 2.5 or 3 hours and 15 minutes, right? With the latter versus, really going to the US Open and there's multiple matches and multiple courts, and you kind of make this more festival experience. So at the heart of it, an esports competition isn't that much longer than that of many traditional sports. We ourselves have made the deliberate business decision that when we go to live events, we're going to create more of that festival experience. That being said, we think there still is a tremendous amount of storytelling outside of that event that you need to do to maximize interest in and to create the long tail sustained interest out. So we're thinking more about that, right? As the event, the plane has landed in every possible sense for our businesses, and now we've had the chance, I think, to slow down and think more about that content and that storytelling, rankings and roster moves and the nuance of it versus being so on the hamster wheel of event to event on a plane and running from it. So you're seeing more of that, I think, through social channels predominantly, which is a lot of, again, where the community lives. And I think now with COVID times and more airwaves, let's say, for experimentation, we're seeing greater opportunity with different distribution platforms to do richer and different types of storytelling. So I think you'll see in the next whatever months from the industry, you'll see more docu-style content, human interest story, things that you might more similar see in other traditional sports that start to unlock the human interest side of the competition.
Well, and you had mentioned earlier too that one of the greatest things about video game sports, about esports, is that anyone could pick up the title and also play. And so I remember when we were working together, we were always working on kind of the holistic view of the competition you watch. But then what was the opportunity through ESL if I wanted to compete in a grassroots or amateur level? I couldn't go play a baseball game right now. I would need to find 17 other people to try to play with or something like that. So that sort of stuff. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the competitive component that ESL has, which I feel like a lot of people don't know as much about, especially in North America, maybe.
Yeah, it's kind of that category tension, if you will, with us and other sports are hard to play, right? If you really think about what it takes to play a game of baseball or soccer or hockey or something, where you got to get the right number of people, you have to have the right equipment, you have to go to the right facilities that often can be cumbersome or expensive or limiting depending on where you are, versus just needing to load up a device, click play, and it will connect you with a much larger pool of participants or willing participants digitally all over the world. So again, we think that going back to those generational trends and shifts, if you will, we think that's one of the things that becomes so powerful with this, is that the accessibility is so high. And that with that, what you're able to do are create little micro achievements along the way, right? I don't know, if you were on your high school basketball team and you won a championship, right? You've got the trophy behind you. And then if you went into college and you did it, and we're able to do that as well, these sort of little progressions and milestones that I think create that excitement and sense of accomplishment, then fuel the competitive spirit within people that keep them playing longer, and therefore more interest as well in the higher level of competition. So that loop of sort of playing and watching and learning and then playing again all kind of fills itself.
Here's another question coming in this COVID environment, as traditional sports are off the air and a lot of sponsors are left with inventory or are left with, are you seeing renewed interest in esports because of that?
We have a lot of, our phones are busy ringing, but I think there's still a lot of economic uncertainty
Sure.
all around of what it is. And, we always joke that revenue lags relevancy, and this is probably the perfect indicator of that.
Right.
Record-breaking viewership, but doesn't necessarily mean the dollars are there. But no, I think it has highlighted the opportunity for esports. It's created windows of opportunity, conversations that maybe weren't priorities before. So yes, we're having more discussions. We've seen the evolution of our brand partnership business grow and mimic that of even something like UFC. If anyone's a UFC fan, you think back, I don't know, I'm gonna say 10 years ago, but it's probably even more like 6. And, it was Mickey's Malt Liquor, and it was Affliction, and it was 5 Hour Energy. And now it's, Budweiser and Reebok, and, there's more premium brand. We're seeing that same sort of evolution. So today, it's not just peripheral and endemic companies that are powering or system component companies powering it. But, we've got large multi-year relationships with companies like Intel and Pepsi and AT&T and DHL out there. So they're all seeing that same trend of needing to get younger And again, I think it's just highlighted that and created an opportunity for conversation that hopefully sustains.
When we were working, there was always this tension when we were talking to brands about the brand fit with the content of the video games themselves, right? A lot of them are shooters. A lot of them have some manner of violence associated with them, whether it's realistic or not. Are you seeing that culture is changing, kind of globally more, and then that's leading to, I mean, people, like, everyone's talking about Animal Crossing, like video games are just on like everyone's mind, or are games changing themselves? Is the content kind of toning down, or maybe some combination of the two? Like, what is helping to fuel some of this brand renewed interest in esports?
I think it's the attractiveness and now scale of the audience. Again, just to continue with the UFC example, would anyone have thought that 10 years ago there'd be UFC on a Disney-owned platform? No way. And here we are, right? So culture changes, it evolves, it understands what does it mean to be a competitor. We used to get a lot the video games and violence question. You don't get that much, right? You realize it's people playing this out. It's not about the content of the screen. So I think it's more of an education process that you go through for people to, one, understand the audience and the opportunity, and then two is to get comfortable. What does it really mean to be part of this community? And then we've seen that as brands and individuals have taken the time to go through that process, then they understand pretty quickly what this is and what it isn't. So there's sort of no shortcut for that. But there does start to become a pull effect too at some point once we cross that critical mass.
All right, I got a bunch of more questions that I want to try. You want to try to do a little bit of a lightning round here?
Sure.
Let's do it. Okay, obviously Fortnite's been big. Do you want to make a call on what the next big hit game is? You want to venture a guess?
Yeah, a lot of interest right now around a game called Valorant coming out from Riot Games, the creator of League of Legends. It's another first-person shooter, non-violent, no red blood sort of approach. A lot of interest around that right now.
Awesome. This one's about fan data. So one of the attractive things about esports is that there are different new metrics that are available. CRM is obviously a super hot topic in sports. What is the type of fan data that is most interesting to ESL right now?
It's a hot topic internally here, again, as we try to unlock more direct-to-consumer monetization. So we've been thinking a lot about it, but it's, ultimately, how do you create the right primary source of data? How can you enrich it through different marketplaces and then use it to retarget, to segment and retarget, whether that's by game, by ticket, by can of Pepsi, whatever it might be. It's how, I think that's an ongoing trend.
Awesome. Okay, so this one's about human performance data in esports. What is happening in human performance data and analysis of the players themselves? Where do you see that going in the future?
John Daly used to, smoke cigars out on the drink beers out on the golf course. So you're seeing that same evolution with esports. The new generation of esports stars, where there's much more emphasis on physical well-being, mental training that goes into it. Again, being a fully digitized sport creates a wider network of data. So being able to map some of the biometric numbers that are coming in and tie that instantly and automatically into the actions of in-game and how you react is just opening up a whole new field. So super, super early, right? There's a whole process of what data do you want? How do you collect it? How do you make sense of it before it becomes actionable? We're probably still in that second and third stages at this point.
Gotcha. Scholastic esports, when is it going to be as big as the kind of NCAA funding in terms of sponsorship and things like that? When's that going to happen?
It's happening. I think you've seen a lot of now big schools and universities start to do it, and it's for a couple of reasons. One is they're recognizing this is where a big part of their student body is. They're not associating as strongly with traditional sports and arts programs, so this is a way to be relevant to students' life. The second big driver is its marketing, particularly international students. Typically pay high-priced tuitions or full-price tuitions, excuse me. I think that's also creating it. And three is just the legitimacy around it. So it's happening. You're seeing more universities invest into it. You're seeing scholarships come in. Obviously, there's an impact with COVID-19 of, all of universities. That's a bigger thing. So whether or not esports loses some of the momentum or gets deprioritized in some, but reprioritized in others will be interesting to see.
Awesome. Betting in esports. How much is it there? Is it going to be growing? Is it regulated? What's the betting scene in esports right now?
Yeah, we're big believers of it. I think it was I don't remember which sports league it was, but it's, you have to adopt it because it's happening with or without you. So there's neither an opportunity to regulate it, ensure integrity, and capture some of that business, or you're going to pretend like you're going to stick your head in the sand and pretend like it's not there. So we've been early adopters onto it. We've created partnerships with companies like Sport Radar to do integrity monitoring. We have relationships with a company called Bayes that does sort of licenses out the data and so forth. So more of it, you're going to see, again, that's a good example. Our events are now sanctioned in Las Vegas, Nevada for legal esports wagering. And I think that will be one of the trends that continues.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to tee you up for a kind of a final question here actually two final questions. First one should be pretty easy. I think I know the answer to this one. Capital S, lowercase s, dash, no dash. How do we write esports? I know how I write esports. How do you write esports?
One word, all lowercase.
One word, all lowercase.
Unless you're starting a sentence, then those always start with capitals.
Right. Social media, clip it, put it on the internet. It's final. All lowercase.
Book it.
No dash. Book it. Exactly. And then last question for me, for the Sports Innovation Lab, our whole reason of existing is to try to get the sports industry smarter, try to get them making better decisions. If you were talking to someone and giving them advice how to get smart about esports, where would they go first to start to learn and get a little bit more smart about esports? What advice would you give them to do?
Yeah, I think the easiest is to immerse yourself into content like this. There's so much of it. Podcasts that are coming out now. The challenge certainly becomes everyone's an expert. So you got to, just like any news source on the internet, you got to make sure you're doing your homework. So Sports Innovation Labs is a great sort of way to do that. But there's a site called the eSports Observer. They're owned by Sports Business Journal, sister companies with them. I think that's very high quality business level kind of news. There's different reports out there from groups like Newzoo. Nielsen's been publishing some stuff. So I think you're seeing more and more high quality data sources come out, and then there's a ton of conferences. And just like anything else, the best thing to do one day will be go back to these things, network with people, mingle with it, and immerse yourself into the culture to really understand from a consumer perspective what's making them tick. And then I think that's going to unlock insights from there.
I love it. I mean, in fact, one of the things I loved about working at ESL, and you said it to me all the time, was that we are as much in the education business as we are in the business of making deals, right? You need to get people smart about this new industry. And so I love that. So Craig, I want to thank you so much. I love talking to you ever since that cold February day in New York at a diner. It was a good diner. Do you remember which one it was? I don't know. It was near your apartment, I think.
Yeah, I don't remember. I just hope you remember your first date with your wife as vividly. That's all.
I promise I do.
Good.
I do.
We won't make you repeat it for here. Just tell it to her later.
Exactly. I will. I appreciate it, Craig. Thank you so much. And Gina, back to you.
Excellent. That was a fascinating conversation. So glad we tackled the esports question, and thank you to everyone who joined. Like, amazing questions today from the audience. So if you have more questions, you want to talk to other experts in the esports space, we got a ton of them on the Slack community. So join there, and please join us this Thursday. If you're curious about how venues are using mobile technology, how venues are using technology in general to get back online, to bring fans back into the stadium safely and with confidence, hear from an expert from Venue Ties Thursday at, I believe, are we at 3 p.m. or 1 p.m. on Thursday?
3 p.m.
3 p.m. 3 p.m. on Thursday. Craig, thank you so much. And we'll see everybody later in the week. Everyone stay safe.
Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Bye.